Liverpool need to rebuild, and they're trying to do it in the transfer market with a relatively small budget. But who do they need to sign? Who will make them better and get back to the title race? And who's a realistic signing? Welcome to Sensible Transfers, where we identify weaknesses in certain teams' squads, and then we identify realistic solutions to those problems. We don't do it based on rumour or conjecture, maybe some actual reporting, no, we'll do that as well, but this is what we're doing. We're trying to find the most sensible transfer to fix the issues within certain squads. Today is Liverpool, as you may have guessed. So first of all, let's look at the state that Liverpool are in right now and see what they need to do. Now, as we know, Liverpool dropped off significantly last year. They went down from 92 points to 67, which is a big drop. And if you look at the goals for and against, that's obviously a big drop as well. But what happened? Well, there's a few things to consider, like for example, Sadio Mane left in the summer, and they brought in loads of new players and changed the system accordingly. So rather than having a false 9 and Bobby Firmino, what they started doing was having Darwin Núñez as a 9 who leads the line like this. So that changed the way they attacked and the way they were constructing chances in the final third, because there's obviously this big gap here. So what they were doing with Núñez leading the line was they changed the makeup of the midfield. They had Thiago and Elliott, who are a different profile midfielder to what they've normally had. These guys are good at threading the ball through in tricky situations, very creative kind of midfielders. So this is what they had now. But because there's a big gap, what they ended up doing is moving Fabinho maybe back here and putting another midfielder next to him like Thiago and playing more of a 10. And so they had Carvalho was playing in this sort of role here. But then this completely changed the makeup of the midfield, and it really had a massive effect on their pressing in particular. And because the pressing wasn't working as well, they were bypassing the first line, which meant the midfield, which had Thiago and Elliott in it, which wasn't as good at trying to win the ball back as, say, Henderson and Curtis Jones, so they were weaker at winning the ball back in the midfield. That meant that teams were able to get Liverpool better in the final third, and so they were focusing a lot of attacks on this sort of side of the pitch with Alexander-Arnold, and so he looked a bit weaker. So rather than pushing Alexander-Arnold up the pitch, which is leaving big spaces in behind, instead they were keeping him slightly deeper, and it changed the makeup of the entire team. Robertson still went forward, but you had Elliott in here and Salah here, and so because Alexander-Arnold was a bit deeper, Salah didn't need to stay in this half space, so instead he came into the wide area, which meant he wasn't getting on the ball as much, so he wasn't as effective. And then Elliott would push forward a little bit, again, not as good an attacker as Salah, and so everything was off. They weren't as good as attacking, and they were much weaker defensively. And then of course there were loads of injuries, and Klopp changed the system again from this because it wasn't working, so he took maybe Thiago out, he's always injured. Let's say we put in Jordan Henderson over here in the midfield too, and it became more of this kind of 4-4-2 shape. Diaz got injured quite early on, Jones came out to the wide left, then you had Elliott goes out here, Salah goes up top next to someone like Núñez, Elliott's back in, but he's on the right side. And so what you had was kind of a weird looking, it could be a front three if Jones pushed forward, it could be a front four, it could be a front three if Elliott pushed forward and Jones was here. But again, didn't work in the same way. The block didn't work quite as well as they wanted. Salah wasn't playing in wide areas to get into the half space, he was playing more through the middle. It just didn't work, so that's where we're at with Liverpool. And then Klopp made another big decision and he changed it back to more of the 4-3-3. So Núñez kind of went on the bench. On came Cody Gakpo because they signed him. You maybe had Jones as part of the midfield with Fabinho and Henderson, so you get the ball-winning midfield here. Gakpo is more of the false 9, Salah's on the right here. Eventually Diaz came back in from injury with Jota as well. So the more traditional 4-3-3 with the 2 wide forwards attacking the half spaces, but crucially they also moved Alexander-Arnold into this pivot role next to Fabinho. So you had the defence came across like this to make more of a back 3. Henderson and Jones push forward, Gakpo here is this false 9, and this is what you had. So you had a box midfield, or even a pentagon midfield with these guys here, with Alexander-Arnold able to distribute the ball around. And this was a big change. And there are problems in this as well. We've covered it before in Tifo IRL videos. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, because you'll see lots of stuff we do tactically with these sorts of teams. There's a big gap here created between Konate and Van Dijk, and that is relevant to something we'll talk about later on as well. But this is what we've got. Weaker up front, weaker defensively, going back to this sort of 4-3-3, and this sort of setup is how we think Klopp will probably line up next season going forward. And as we know in last season, the midfield was the weakest part. So let's start there and look at the kind of profile of player that Liverpool should be looking at. So what sort of midfielder does Klopp want? Well, we can sort of base what we think it might be based on his maybe best Liverpool team, which had Fabinho as a 6, you had Wijnaldum going box to box and playmaking in the final third, and Jordan Henderson as the right-sided ball-winning box-to-box player, the captain, the leader. That's what you really want to have. Now, of course, they've got problems with this because it's starting to change. Fabinho is still there as a 6, and he will be there next season. You got Bajcetic can come in as a backup to him, a young player, and Klopp has a history of bringing through young players and making them very good, so he'll get some minutes as well. Then on the left, you had Thiago, who is almost always injured, so you can't rely on him anymore. And Curtis Jones came in, and he was really important, playing that kind of Wijnaldum role. And you can see this is what Wijnaldum did in the 2021 season when Liverpool were really, really good. And we can look at what Curtis Jones is doing in the same season. This is not last season or the season before, it's the one before that. But you can see he's basically doing what Wijnaldum does, but even better, a really important player. So he'll be getting lots of minutes this season as well, now he's recovered from injury. So we've got Fabinho, we know Curtis Jones is very important to how they played. Jordan Henderson's obviously really important. He's the captain, but he's 33, so probably getting towards the end of the time that he can spend every single minute on a pitch. He doesn't play every single game now. That's what we've got. And then in terms of depth, Thiago is always broken, so you can't play him. Carvalho's gone out on loan. Bajcetic is back up to Fabinho. Then you've got Harvey Elliott, plays right side. He's learning, not as strong defensively, will get better. Then you've got James Milner and Naby Keita who have left. So that's kind of the squad depth we're talking about. We know they need to improve in these positions. They brought in Alexis McAllister from Brighton, and this is a big change. And we think he'll probably play on the left of the midfield three because that's kind of where he has in the past, and data shows us it, as you can see here. He'll probably be here, this sort of position, as part of that new box midfield we're talking about. So if we're looking at players need to sign, it's likely to be the right-sided central midfielder, or possibly extra backup for Fabinho should he become injured and Bajcetic can't be relied upon. Which brings us to our first pick for central midfield, and that man is Khéphren Thuram. Now, yes, this guy's been linked strongly with Liverpool in the past, but guess what? The scouts at Liverpool are doing the same thing we're doing, trying to identify real good players for these positions. And what Khéphren Thuram does that they don't have is an amazing ability to carry the ball through players. He runs through the middle of the pitch. And that would be very useful for Liverpool, because if you put him in here and replace Jordan Henderson in this position here, what you then get is a player who can carry the ball and break lines that way. So in the past, you've had players who can break lines by passing. McAllister might be an option for that, but they tend to have players who get forward, we know this, and they attack like this. And then what you have is the depth pass comes from Alexander-Arnold, either from wide or more recently from deep like this. And so what you can then get is Fabinho protects, McAllister goes forward, Thuram is now over here if he were to sign. And Thuram, rather than trying to pass through a big block like this, which is hard to do, he can just carry the ball through, and he loves running at people. That's why his progressive carries are so high. Also, he's 22, he'll be available for about 35 to 40 million pounds, which fits within Liverpool's budget, and that's why it's very sensible. But this progressive carries bit is the real key when we're looking at what Khéphren Thuram would bring to the team. So Khéphren Thuram would be excellent at breaking lines by carrying the ball. But what about if you want to break lines by passing the ball through and giving yourself more of a Thiago Alcantara kind of option, be able to open up a defence with a line-splitting pass? That's when you go to someone like Dominik Szoboszlai. This guy's amazing, and yes, he has been linked with Liverpool in the past. In fact, David Ornstein has reported it in The Athletic. Now, he has a 70 million euro release clause, which is quite a lot, but this guy's amazing. He basically took Hungary single-handedly to Euro 2020 back in the day, remember that back in the day? But also, what he does is phenomenal. He's got amazing shot-creating actions and progressive passes. He can play across the front of the front three, he can play across the midfield in any position, not the 6, it's more of an 8 or a 10. He's left-footed, mostly comes off the right onto that sort of position. So he would fit in perfectly to this right side of midfield where, you can see he can play across the front, he can play as a false 9, left side, right side. He's done all of this for both club and country. He is phenomenal. He played mostly as a 10. He's quite similar to, not quite the same, but similar to what maybe Felipe Coutinho gave them back in the day as well, because Szoboszlai, so he can carry the ball, he's lots of tricks, he regularly does little skill tricks to go past people, he combines brilliantly in tight spaces, so if you have all these players around him, he's going to be able to combine perfectly with 1-2s and flick the ball on, but also he can really punch a shot from distance. So have a good hit from here and put it into the back of the net. It was very useful because if you think even Oxlade-Chamberlain's goals in the Champions League for Liverpool a few seasons ago, really important being able to have someone who can just punt it now and again and help break down teams like that. Szoboszlai would be an amazing capture for Liverpool, but he would be expensive. But we established earlier that Liverpool's real problem was in their press in midfield. And although Szoboszlai works very hard off the ball, he's obviously not quite as good at doing it as certain others. McAllister's kind of in the same boat as well. So they might be weaker in this midfield position, even though they've got their pressing structure the same as before with the front three of Gakpo, Salah and Jota. And that's why they might consider a different profile of midfielder, one who gives them something different and maybe helps replace long-term Jordan Henderson. And that's why I've gone with Manu Kone. Now this guy, again, yes, is heavily linked with Liverpool. Again, the same things I told you, that's why he's kind of here. But this is a very different profile of player. First of all, he's good progressively. He can carry it or pass it around. He's a big, strong lad. He's also really good at winning the ball back. This is his forte, and this is what you get. And he would go into this slot here where Henderson is. But if we assume that Henderson is the kind of first choice centre midfielder on this right-hand side. What you get from Thuram is a player who can learn from him and keep developing. He's got a low floor but a really high ceiling. Like, he's not as good as Henderson at all things he does yet, but could become a really important player. Like we say, he's an aggressive ball winner. He's like maybe a riskier version of Moises Caicedo, that sort of player. So you're buying someone who's not quite there yet, but could easily get there with the right coaching, which of course Liverpool would have if he were there. But let's put him out. Because what if you did something else in your midfield? What if you moved a player into that position that hasn't played there really before? What if you did this? Well, a few things happen, and we've seen a few of them already, and not all of them are good. First of all, the good thing is that Alexander-Arnold is phenomenal in this position at being able to distribute play from deep, playing people in. Maybe Robertson can overlap and you can ping him from here, and also you can create and break lines with his passing. We've seen him do it for England, we've seen him do it for Liverpool towards the end of last season, so it's possible. And we think, based on what Klopp has said, that this is kind of what they'll probably focus on doing this season and work on Alexander-Arnold's positioning. But the problem is, in the past, we've covered it in previous videos, is that it creates a big gap here between Konate and Van Dijk. Konate has to cover both right back and centre back. Now what they could do is try and bring in a player here to cover for Konate, because he can't be trusted to always be fit. He's often injured. Joe Gomez can cover, of course, he can play that, but he's not been the best at it in the past when he's had to do this. And there are tactical reasons for why Konate even struggled. It's because he might push up and try and win the ball high up here, which just leaves this massive gap in behind, no matter who's there. So someone who's good at being a natural right back and a centre back would suit this role perfectly, especially as cover for Konate, or even to challenge him for a first team place. And that's why our pick for this is Benjamin Pavard. Now, he only has 1 year left in his deal at Bayern Munich. This guy is international footballer. Remember a goal he scored for France in the World Cup where he kind of hits a volley on the side of his boot. It's amazing. But this guy is a phenomenal player as a centre back and a right back. He covers all the bases. As you can see, there's lots of green, which means he's very good. But what you get particularly, what's really important, are these ones here. Passes attempted, pass completion, progressive passes, and progressive carries. He can keep the ball, he can pass it, move play forward, and he can carry it, so he can play at both right back and centre back, which would help cover for Alexander-Arnold if he is moving inside, particularly if Alexander-Arnold becomes a full-time midfielder and they don't bother with the inverted fullback situation. You can start Pavard as the right back alongside Konate and Van Dijk and Robertson, and then you gain Alexander-Arnold as a pivot player, as a 6, or even move him higher up the pitch as a number 8. So you gain a lot, and that gives you more depth that way. That's why he's our pick for a sensible transfer at centre back. But if we look at this little graphic, what we will see is that Liverpool's depth is very obviously in the left centre-back situation. Now with Van Dijk, who is still an elite player, he's 31, so you get at least 2 more years, 3 more years of him being the top pick. Maybe he'll get even longer, like Thiago Silva, who's 38 still playing. But you need someone who can back up this. At the moment they've got Konate, Gomez, Matip, who might leave. Nathan Phillips might leave. Reece Williams is going on loan to Aberdeen, where he'll do very well, of course. Van der Berg might get moved up as an option as an under-21 player. But this is the kind of real weakness here, and something we should address in sensible transfers. And we know that Van Dijk is not just a great defender because he's massive and he can smash the ball away, but also he's brilliant on the ball and positionally. But what you can do is spread these long passes out wide to a left runner or a right runner like this, and that really helps Liverpool in the back. So these are the key things. You want someone who can progress the ball through passing, but also carry it a little bit and then play the pass to help Liverpool overload people in midfield. And so we're looking at players like him, profiled just like him. Now, players who profile a lot like him are people like Josko Gvardiol. He's out their budget, can't really bring him in. Nico Schlotterbeck at Dortmund, only signed for them last season, would be too expensive, so again, he's kind of out. And we need to think that the player who would come in would need to be able to play second fiddle to Van Dijk, but equally start about 20 games a season. So they wouldn't be relied on to play 38, 45 games a season. They maybe have to cover for Van Dijk, but step in when he's injured, out of form, suspended, or even just to rest him in Europe, because he's got Europa League obviously, or in cup games, things like that, and give Van Dijk a rest so he can prolong his career and play even more. And so that's why I looked at a player called Piero Hincapié, who you may remember from the World Cup for Ecuador. He is fantastic. He's also a left-sided centre-back who can play at left-back. So you get a lot of options with him. But what you can see he's good at winning the ball back, makes lots of tackles, lots of passes attempted, progressive carries. He can do it all from that left-sided position. And that's also relevant because Andy Robertson is the one who has to come across to be the left-sided centre-back. And he's very much an attacking winger, attacking wing-back, we might call him. He likes to go up here. So if you do want to transition and play Alexander-Arnold in more of this position next to the two, even in this sort of situation here, Robertson can come out and Tsimikas can come in, same problem. They're both attacking wingers who want to play in this sort of part of the pitch. So you bring in Hincapié, you got a player who plays at centre back who's comfortable at left back, a bit like how Man City moved Nathan Ake or Laporte to that side. That's what you get, a player natural in two positions rather than one learning to do it. So that's kind of why. But the thing with Hincapié is that he just signed a new contract in February for Bayer Leverkusen, so he'd be either really expensive or just wouldn't be available. So he's not the sensible transfer pick. I know that's a bit devious of me, and so I'll give you another one. But there are even more things to consider before I tell you who that is, because there's rules to follow. You have to remember the rules when you're building a squad. Now, in the Premier League, you have to name 25, a maximum of 25 players, 8 of which, whichever, they need to be homegrown. That's very important because Liverpool have a shortage of this. Now, if you have 8 homegrown players, that's good, that's what you want. If you only have 6 homegrown players, then that means you can't name 25 as a total, you can name 23, because you see 8 minus 6 is 2, so then 2, that's what you get. So the fewer homegrown players you have, the fewer non-homegrown players, as in players from abroad, you can name in your team. You can fill the gaps with under 21 players, but Liverpool have a real shortage here, because as you can see, they only have Bajcetic, Elliott and Ramsey is under 21 players, and Ramsey's gone on loan to Preston, so they have 2 under 21 players. And that leaves Liverpool's only homegrown players as Curtis Jones, Jordan Henderson, Joe Gomez, and Trent Alexander-Arnold. So they can't name that many players from abroad, and if they signed McAllister already, that means they can only sign 2 more to fit into the squad to make sure they can meet the regulations of the Premier League. So they need to sign a homegrown player or 2, don't they? Which means our next actual sensible transfer to fix the problem, give them depth at the back, to cover Van Dijk, to change the system up a little bit so Robertson can maybe push forward sometimes or get a rest and protect that side of the pitch is Levi Colwill. Now again, a very expensive player, probably if Chelsea would even sell him, but this guy could be the future. Now he spent all of last season on loan at Brighton where he was excellent, and that's why his numbers here look so good, because that's over the last 365 days you see. Thank you FBref. And what you have are passes attempted, completed, progressive passes and progressive carries, and that shows he's the kind of player who'd be excellent at distributing the ball and carrying it, so he'd work as a replacement for Van Dijk or competition because he's very young, so he wouldn't have to play every single game. Now, would that harm his development? Possibly, but you can play a few games a season, you can back up Van Dijk, you've got an extra homegrown player who's young and can develop into a superb long-term option. So if not now, because it might take a lot out of the budget for Liverpool, he might be a perfect option for them going forward in the future, because they need homegrown players, they need someone to cover for Van Dijk and give them some squad depth, and they need better players all round to bring the team up, especially if they're changing the system a little bit. And Colwill would go into this left-sided centre-back position as well to cover for this. He can play out in the left kind of half space as well, maybe not as much of a left-back as Hincapié, but he can certainly do a job within this. And if not, Van Dijk can come out when he's injured, Colwill goes here, Kanté goes here, and then you're back to where you were with Robertson, where I've put him over here, making the back 4, and that could be the long-term solution. But of course, all this depends on what Liverpool actually do. We're trying to pick sensible transfers for them, not telling them what to do. And what we know they need from our analysis of it is depth, especially in midfield, especially in defence, because if they move Alexander-Arnold to a midfield position, they need someone at right back who isn't what they already have. That's where Pavard comes in. We know they need someone who can replace Van Dijk eventually, if not give him competition now, because he makes some mistakes now and again. That's why the left centre-back is so important, especially the change of system and shape. That's why you need someone who can maybe play this left centre-back role if Robertson were not the option, because he likes to go forward. But we know the focus is on midfield. That's where they need to improve. They've done it with McAllister already, and they'll probably buy someone else to go in this position here in the right centre midfield. And they should be better next season. They should be, especially if they make some sensible transfers.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.